Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will do my best, Mr. Speaker, to be able to respond to some of the questions and points that were raised by members on the opposite side as it pertains to this loan. First of all, my good friend, the member from Castries Southeast, responded to him, but let me just reiterate that when we came into government, this project was nowhere near being completed. In fact, all that had happened, Mr. Speaker, is the process of how the concession was going to work is what had been negotiated with the IFC. In fact, even the design that was being used as the model was the design that was being done or had been done by Harry. In fact, SLASPA turned around and actually purchased that design from the Essenza group and were using that design and paid for it. Yes, they paid for it. As I said, they actually purchased that design. Okay, so in fact, they paid for it, purchased it because it was part of what the consortium was already proposing, and they bought it from them. So in fact, that they were down to about 3 concessionaires in which they were preparing to send a final bid out to them on the project. And it was estimated, Mr. Speaker, that they would have paid them the $60. In fact, when we came in, the concessionaires were making reference to a number of $60. But they were also saying that the $60 was going to be insufficient, Mr. Speaker. So in fact, they wanted more than the $60 to be able to do the airport concession. The design had not been finished. Major details in the project had not been completed. So I don't know at the pace that they were going at whether in fact the statement that we would be opening up the airport today would actually be a valid one if we had continued going down the pace that we're going to go. The member from Castries South brought up some very interesting points. And I think it's worth it taking on those points, because I think that he was actually getting closer to really what the choices we have to make. So he's 100% right that when it comes to the stress of having to pay back the loan, both models address that issue, because both models were using an additional airport tax to pay for it. So this was not new money. This was not money that was coming out of the existing consolidated fund. So when we say it had its own revenue stream, the tax itself was being used, which was new, to be able to pay for it. So the difference really is the risk that you're prepared to take on in carrying that debt onto your GDP, or whether in fact you're willing to give the access of all those revenues to a third party in order not to have the debt to GDP on your books, to increase the debt to GDP. And that when we looked at the concession, the fact is the concession was for 30 years. There was no getting out of that. Regardless of how well the country was doing, if we brought in a lot more tourists, if we doubled the tourists, there was no situation here where they would give back the money. The formula for getting back the money under the concession was if in fact the concession made money, that then they would share in that profit with the government. And we felt that borrowing the money, while yes, exposed us to having increased our debt to GDP, but we believe the country is going to do better. And if it does better, it means that we can pay off the loans earlier, and then the additional amount of revenue that's being generated could now be used to fund other important projects in St. Lucia, including the highway. So we've already said that we're going to take $28 off of the $98 to assign towards the highway. And that if in fact we're able to be successful, and we think that if we could increase our tourism arrivals currently, which are at 400,000, but we believe that between the cruise ship home porting and the new rooms that are about to begin construction in St. Lucia, the combination of those two at minimum is going to increase by another 100,000 arrivals, but potentially could actually increase it to 250,000 arrivals, which means that we could pay off the loan, Mr. Speaker, in less than 10 years. And that's huge, because in paying off the loan in less than 10 years, it also means you're going to be spending less money on interest, and now you're going to have cash available to you. And when we looked at our debt to GDP numbers, that unlike Barbados and unlike Jamaica, which were over 100%, in fact, both of them well over 100%, they just didn't have that fiscal space to take on that risk. Whereas we genuinely believe that by investing in the airport, the monies that we're investing in the road rehabilitation projects, and with the FDI, the foreign direct investment coming into St. Lucia, that we believe that we can grow by more than 5% per year. And if we grow by more than 5%, or at least 5% per year, we will see a decline in the debt to GDP numbers. Now, members of the opposite side, Mr. Speaker, have from the time that we've gotten into office, and we've been doing what we've been doing, have been making the allegation that, I think the member from Castries says we're reckless, we're irresponsible. But yet, how does a reckless and irresponsible party, that according to his own numbers, that we've only achieved 2 bridges, been able to reduce the debt to GDP in this country from 69% to 64%? How is it that we've grown the economy for 3 years? How is it that the tax revenues in this country are higher than $1.1 billion? How is it that corporate tax went from 75 million to 90 million? And let's remember that in addition to the things that he's alleging, we also reduced the taxes. So we've not achieved those numbers by taxing people. We believe in the economy. We believe in the private sector in this country. We believe in the capability of the people of this country. And we have empowered them. That's what we've done. So it says to you that they have a very naive and a very simple version of how the economy works. But then we should not be surprised, because we have 15 years of a Minister of Finance that has been a dismal failure. The only thing that he's been able to increase is the debt of this country, and that has come at the expense of the reputation of the country, the confidence of the country. It has come at the expense of the more vulnerable people of our society, because government has not been in a position to be able to help them. So that was a very clear choice that we made. And when we came to present the $100 million loan, we said that. We said, yes, we understand what the contingent liability is. We understand what the potential impact of that contingent liability is going to be. But we believe that that's a risk-taking because the reward on the other side is so significant. And that when we were able to now negotiate with the Taiwanese, and especially Exim Bank, and to get the concessionary rate and terms of the loan, it made the decision that much easier. And we said, the condition of having to use a Taiwanese construction company, particularly a company that is partially owned public and private sector, particularly one that has the level of experience that they have since 1994, on completing projects on time, completing projects within budget, and providing world-class standards, that we felt comfortable in moving that direction. And so the governance structure of the loan is theirs. Now, Mr. Speaker, members on the other side would also have you believe somehow that by having a concessionaire reduces the risk the country has. And that somehow if the project is over budget or it's late, that it's not the people of St. Lucia that's going to pay the bill. And there's nothing that can be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. Because the revenue that's coming in for the project is the revenue from the airport tax. That's our money. That's a concept that the members of the other side, and particularly of the Labour Party, have not understood. As if that's just falling from the sky and it's a gift from somebody else, and you're not supposed to be thinking of it as your resources. When the member talks about that we come here and callously want to approve a $202 million budget. Mr. Speaker, the callous persons were the members on the opposite side that when they had the $35 in place, that they took that off. That's when it was callous. Because if they had left it on, Mr. Speaker, we would be much more advanced than we are, and we'd have to be borrowing substantially less money today than we're having to. That is the level of irresponsibility and the pettiness that takes place as members on the other side. And it's that pettiness and their emphasis on politics that put the country in the mess that it was in. But in 3 years, members on this side have been able to manage the economy and reverse the trends and bring confidence back into this country. The member from Castries East also made mention, you're taking this chance. What happens if we don't have arrivals? Well, we've looked at the history of 40 years, where we've had the czars, we've had 9/11, we've had a recession, we've had natural disasters. And what time has shown us is that tourism is substantially more resilient than everybody's been giving it credit for. In fact, the industry that has rebounded the fastest globally after the recession was tourism. The fastest growing industry in the world. And the fact is, and I think the Minister of Tourism alluded to it, that it's no longer a luxury to go on a vacation. People want to go on a vacation. And we're seeing that global trends are growing significantly. And our proximity to some of the fastest growing economies gives us the confidence that this is going to continue. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, that when we think of it in absolute terms and percentage terms, the Caribbean is only 1.5% of global tourism. And St. Lucia is only 1.5% of Caribbean's tourism. To put it even in more specific numbers, St. Lucia currently gets about 170 or 180,000 US arrivals. Jamaica gets 750,000 US arrivals from the tri-state, from Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, by themselves. Aruba, which is the same distance away as we are from New York City, gets 3 times the amount of arrivals that we're getting. So we genuinely believe that the capacity for St. Lucia to be able to grow is there. And that's the difference between members on this side. We believe in St. Lucia. We believe in a country in which we can prosper more. And we believe, yes, that people are tired of living in ghettos. And people aspire for much more than that. But members on the other side, Mr. Speaker, continuously don't have faith, don't want to dream about a better day for St. Lucians, and are not willing to work hard and challenge themselves to be able to deliver to the people of St. Lucia what they so richly deserve. Members on the other side want to confuse everybody about the size of the loan. We were very clear. If I can, Mr. Speaker, if I can read from a Hansard report. which was the Honorable Stephenson King's presentation to the House when he presented the bill. He said, among those who came forward, Mr. Speaker, the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan, who offered US $150 million for infrastructure development. It is not a grant, it is a loan. It is a soft loan from the Export-Import Bank of Taiwan, and for this we decided our aging infrastructure needs attention. So we decided not simply to utilize the $150 million only for the airport, but to allocate $50 million for roads, schools, and housing, which we'll deal with a little later, and to utilize the $100 million for the redevelopment of the Huanora International Airport. We engaged, tried, tested, and proven architects and engineers who have been involved in the major airport development projects in the United States, particularly in Miami, which is hairy, and thought that we should probably rest our case there and continue what we started, for which the last administration purchased the last design and earned the rights to the design. I skip down to the next paragraph, and it says, once the project is completed, Mr. Speaker, and the intention of the government is to seek other avenues, both grant and loan funds, to meet the total cost of the facility of $175 million. That's going all the way back to when the bill was first presented, $175 million. The government believes that we can start the project and in the meantime negotiate for the balance. The project will entail, as I said earlier, on a new terminal with modern facilities, jet bridges, modern cargo handling and luggage screening, etc. Security and all of the services needed at the airport. The Prime Minister has indicated that the terminal will be stacked with departures to the top and arrivals to the ground floor. In addition to this, a new control tower will be constructed, but more than that, it's the existing project of the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Program, which will deal with the river which often floods the airport, to take the water away from the airport and to ensure that the airport is safe. So we've been in discussions since then with the World Bank, both through an IDA fund and through DVRP, to be able to allocate funds to do a couple of things at the airport. One is to deal with the flood mitigation. Two is to do with the resurfacing of the runway. And three is to be able to build the taxiways. And that will be on top of the $175 million. That's what the cost of the program is. That's what the project is. And what we said is that we would have waited initially to have done the resurfacing of the runway, but the fact is that the World Bank are making extremely concessional funds available to us. And we believe it's more prudent at this point to proceed with the resurfacing and the taxiway, and not to wait, because those funds are going to be made available. So I'm hoping to be able to announce that very soon, Mr. Speaker, and we obviously will come back to the House to do the approval process on those funds for that project. But the Minister was very clear. There was no ambiguity, Mr. Speaker. None. So I'm shocked and dismayed at the attempts of the members on the other side to continue to try to convince people otherwise. We talk about that we're borrowing this money, and this money could have been used to be able to do other projects and social programs. The monies that we're borrowing are coming from the tourist. 85% of the people who are going through the airport are tourists. But that doesn't mean that we have not been committed to the social development of this country. We've allocated last year $10 million, the first year $5 million, and this year another $10 million towards the rehabilitation of the schools. And as the Minister Southeast indicated, that doesn't include Choiseul. And the roofs at the schools. We're spending money to fix up the roads. We're spending almost $114 million in the next couple of months. We've been able to finalize the negotiations with the British through CDB to spend £30 million on rehabilitating the West Coast Road. We're finalizing the Japanese loan, JICA, which is about $40 million for the bridge in cul-de-sac. We're also negotiating with the Taiwanese to finalize the loans for St. Jude's, which will be about $30 million, and also for the new police headquarters. We've put in over 160 cameras in Gros Islet and down to Castries, and we're now about to add another 160 cameras in the Castries market. And we have now the center, the command center, operational up, where we've now combined the fire response numbers and the police response numbers. We've now put a new communication system in for the policemen. So it means that they have a VHS system dedicated to them, both in the cars and then when they travel themselves, and specific handheld units for the firemen, which are waterproof. We've gotten 4 of the Coast Guard boats up and operating. We've gotten the new forensic lab fully operational. We intend to, when we build a new police headquarters in Castries at the old prison, to now include 7 courts. We're in the process of putting a new healthcare facility on the chaussee and upgrading the facility there, which would allow us now to close down Victoria completely. We are spending $12 million on US on sporting facilities. The one in Soufrière mini stadium has already begun, and we hope to have it completed in record time. We're also going to be opening up the first dedicated sports academy using the Gros Islet School. We're fixing up all of the health centers and making them green. And at the same time, we've borrowed $15 million US from the World Bank in order to put new equipment into those facilities, in order that people go there first, and that the first call doesn't mean that you're going to go to the hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not a government that is narrow-minded and only thinking about politics, but genuinely improving the quality of life of people in this country. I'm so happy to see the number of housing projects that are getting off the ground. In Beauchamp, in Choiseul, in Choc, as well as I know that Proud is doing several projects, including one at Angers in my constituency, and soon in Dennery. And that we talk about doing them on a joint venture basis with private sector people, where government is putting in the land and putting in the incentives. We've put over $20 million into the St. Lucian Development Bank, and we're about to bring to the House a guarantee for $10 million more to facilitate young entrepreneurs in order that they can invest equity into small businesses in this country. So it is unfair to say that government has not been paying attention to the softer things in this country. We've just added 80 more caretakers in the caretakers program, 80. We've added 3 more social workers, and we want to be able to double that amount within the next 2 years. This is a government that's committed to being able to help the more vulnerable people in our society. The one project that we're very excited about is the health care insurance that we're going to hope to have ready to come to this House by January. And we're looking to have it implemented by April of next year on schedule. So, Mr. Speaker, these are not true. I want to deal, Mr. Speaker, with what I consider to be the very dangerous statements made by the member from Vieux Fort South. I have to say to you, I was really taken aback that he would have gone to the extent that he has to try to derail this project. And in doing so, trying to undermine the credibility of the Bank of St. Lucia. And particularly given the track record of the bank while he was Minister of Finance, I thought that he would not have gone there. Because that's certainly, I would say to you, if there wants to be an opening of a discussion, clearly that's what we should really be talking about, how the bank found itself in that position. But in the last 3 years, the bank has right-sided up. And I want to read, if I can, you have the Social and Economic Review. In the 2018 Social and Economic Review, Mr. Speaker, if I can go to page 62, and the heading is the banking sector. And it says, developments in the financial and monetary sector in 2018 were largely influenced by positive developments in the wider economy. Net foreign assets continued to accelerate despite a drop in St. Lucia's imputed reserves at the ECCB. Notwithstanding a reduction in lending rates, domestic credit weakened further in 2018 amidst persistent deposit growth, resulting in rising liquidity in the banking system. Rise in liquidity. Interest rates are coming down. I mean, and I know that he's an economist, and I know he understands the mathematics of a bank. If a bank has a deposit and is paying interest, I really resent that statement because it's so erroneous. And I actually think you ought to ask him to take back that statement. Because that's a very derogatory statement, to even make the suggestion that a Prime Minister or Minister of Finance has the ability to plunder the Bank of St. Lucia. But that is what the people of this country have come accustomed to. That only when he's in charge and he is the Prime Minister, everything is good. But when he is not in charge and he's not in control, everything is bad, and the worst in everybody comes out. But you see, his genuine lack of trust of the people of this country comes out through his bitterness. Cannot stand to sit there and to see that somebody else is going to be successful. Can't stand to see that the fact that the country is turning around, that the economy is growing. In fact, that the bank can afford to be able to give a loan at 5%. That's what the truth is. And I think, anyway, the stock of net domestic credit continued to trend downward from its peak in 2013, declining by 3.3% in 2018. This decline was largely driven by a 14.5% growth in net liabilities to non-financial public enterprises as their bank deposits rose substantially. The continued contraction in private sector credit also contributed to the reduction in domestic credit, reflecting decreases in both business and household credit by 2.8% and 1.6% respectively. These declines overshadowed a 9.9% increase in the net credit to the general government to $210 million. So the bank's own report shows that its profitability has come back, and it's substantially increased the amount of profits it has, that the economy is turning around, and that they're seeing these deposits. And these deposits actually are liabilities on the bank when the bank sits on this money. So one, I want to say very clear that my government has the greatest amount of confidence in St. Lucians and St. Lucian institutions. And we believe that those institutions ought to get a piece of the cake of development in this country. So when you have a loan that is now being backed by two things. One, an airport tax of which the numbers are measurable and have been reliable. Furthermore, substantiated and supported by a government guarantee. Why should we go out if in fact you have local institutions prepared to pay that, to make that money? Furthermore, I am proud of the fact that the Bank of St. Lucia has taken a lead role in order to syndicate the loan. And the syndication is to not just here in St. Lucia, but in the region. I'm also happy to report to the House that that syndication is oversubscribed. And I'm sure once the syndication is completed, the bank will make available who the syndicates are. But I am not at liberty to do that at this point. And the member from Beaufort South knows that. He knows what the system is. We're not involved. And the fact is, if it's going to be syndicated, based on the same recommendation they were saying we should do a bond. Well, we did it through the bank. And so the commitment fee of 0.75% is in order to be able to help the bank pay for putting that syndication together. The last thing I really want to bring up, Mr. Speaker, and it's again a sad indictment on members on the other side, particularly on the member from Castries South, who continues to perpetuate this argument that somehow that there is a U.S. investigation into the airport project in St. Lucia. In fact, there's nothing further from the truth. The investigation was instigated by this government, members of the other side, in where they hired Bob Lindquist to be able to do an investigation. And when Mr. Lindquist failed to find the information that they wanted, so in fact, there are several things that Mr. Lindquist unearthed which they have not chosen to share. But they were not happy with his findings and in fact wanted more. And so Mr. Lindquist asked them to make a request of the US government to get the telephone records of Mr. Ascenza. And a letter was written to the Justice Department in the US for that request. And in that letter indicated that Minister Guy Joseph and myself were persons of interest. Now, first of all, I don't know that the Attorney General, sorry, Mr. AG, has the ability to start and be part of a criminal investigation. I thought that that was the role of the DPP. But in this case, it was the AG who wrote to say that these people were persons of interest. And I'm so happy that the member from Castries East, former AG, the members from Castries East talked about the uniqueness of SLASPA. In that SLASPA has two ministers that it reports to. It reports to the Minister of Infrastructure for day-to-day operations, and it reports to the Minister of Finance for financial matters. So that in the matter of the concession that was being negotiated at SLASPA, the former AG made the allegation that Minister Guy Joseph, when he was the Minister of Infrastructure, threatened the then managing director of SLASPA that if he did not put A&M on the short list and have them approved, he would have them fired. Well, there's another interesting, unique feature of the SLASPA rules, that the minister that approves the appointment of the managing director of SLASPA is the Minister of Finance, not the Minister of Infrastructure. And the persons that actually hire the managing director is the board. That's who he reports to. And in fact, the minister, the board, the managing director, sorry, is an ex officio officer on the board. So he doesn't even get to vote. So imagine Sean Matthews trembling in his boots that somehow the minister is going to have him fire, a minister that is not involved in his hiring or in his firing. He himself cannot vote at SLASPA, finds a way to bring A&M onto the short list. I still haven't figured out how he's done that. The next part that's interesting is that the SLASPA board is very much of a prescribed board, meaning that the chairperson of SLASPA, Mr. Speaker, is always the director of finance. And in those days, it was Isaac Anthony, the PS of finance. Okay. The PS of finance. In our case, it happens to be the same because when Mr. Isaac Anthony was there, he was both. The next thing is that the deputy chairperson of the SLASPA board is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Communications and Works and Infrastructure. And the person that was then the PS was Alison Jean. The AG's office, in their own right, appointed somebody. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a lady, I can't remember her name, but a very, very prominent lady and very effective. And then they also had the private sector meets appointments. So Jared Bergas, if I'm not mistaken, was on the board, etc. And Georgia Steele. So here you have this independent board of people that we know in our society and that we have the highest regard for. That somehow Guy Joseph, along with Sean Matthews, engineered and maneuvered all those board members to accept A&M on the list. And at once now that that's approved at the board level, the board then makes the recommendation and it goes to cabinet. And at cabinet, right, who is the person that gets it? The Minister of Finance presents it at cabinet and it's voted on at cabinet. So I fail to understand how the then AG could have made these allegations against Minister Joseph, particularly knowing what the structure that we had. So the next thing that we've had is that a request then was made with that letter to get telephone numbers. That's what the request was for, to get telephone numbers that were made by Mr. Asenza on his phone. Sorry? That's what the requests to the courts were made, was for phone numbers. And it was supposed to remain under, what was it called? Seal. And somehow in the system, we don't know how, that somehow it did not get under seal, and this information then came out public. And it was through that we discovered on this side that there was actually an investigation. Because when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, there was no file at the Attorney General's office, despite the fact that the Attorney General was the person. Then the next thing that happened is that the Attorney General was left in charge of what it was supposed to be. Followed by what? That the Accountant General's office that was making the payments of $1 million, all that they had was a signature page of the contract. And we would know through the Financial Act that there is a requirement that the Accountant General's office has a copy of the contract. The Cabinet Secretary's office that was heavily involved, no files, no information, the greatest amount of secrecy. So I go into this level of detail to assure the public of St. Lucia that when I went and did my investigation to find out whether in fact there was an investigation into the members of any of this government, including myself, to find out that no, there was no investigation by the Justice Department. In fact, we have a letter from the Justice Department stating that there is no investigations ongoing in St. Lucia. It was simply responding to a request by a friendly government that it had made the allegation that there was some fraudulent behavior, particularly criminal, in order to help justify them getting the information. But we shouldn't be surprised. So after 5 years, again, like everything else, they couldn't see it through. $1 million US was spent on the investigation. And I know that the member from Cass 3 Southeast has challenged the members from the other side to produce the report. He keeps on bringing up the Richard Fedrick statement. But I want to know, how can I take Richard Fedrick as being credible when he was at one point on United Workers' Party? When he got kicked out of the United Workers' Party, he then found himself on the platform of the Labour Party. Now, my information indicates to me that he is now a full-fledged member, and they are actually considering to have him run in Cass 3 Central. So how is it that I am supposed to take any statement made by Richard Fedrick, a man who is in court on many cases right now? I believe he just lost a case in court. So all I'm saying, I have sued him. I've sued him. I've sued him. I've sued him. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to bring this to an end. There's absolutely...
Honorable Prime Minister, honorable members, we've gone well this morning. Not because it's getting to the night time that we should get out of. Mr. Prime Minister, you may continue, sir.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that we can put this matter to rest, that there is no U.S. investigation in NT Ministers. There's absolutely no proof or anything that went wrong previously. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, for those members in the general public, there was never any money. The project was never funded. In fact, members on this side and the Minister of Finance will remember that when we were in the negotiations with Deutsche Bank, we were trying to restrict the loan to be less than 6%.
Honorable members, allow the Prime Minister. I need to hear the Prime Minister. The 1, 2, 3, 4 of you can take on. I am not going to be a party to that. The Honorable Prime Minister, I'm trying to protect you somehow. You may continue now.
So, Mr. Speaker, I want to re-emphasize the point that this noise that is being made by the members on the opposite side has no validity. Okay? These are pure false allegations. There is no proof of any wrongdoing. None. In fact, they know that. In fact, the report that they have says that. But maybe one day, they'll produce the report. One day, they'll make the report public. Okay? So at the end of the day, so, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the public of St. Lucia that the government has acted extremely responsibly in this airport development project, that we are going to deliver a world-class project. I have the greatest amount of confidence in OECC and their reputation and their ability to deliver this project on time and within budget. I am very comfortable with the governance structures that they have. So, Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the Bank of St. Lucia for agreeing to head up the syndication, and I want to thank all of the regional institutions that have agreed to help fund this project. And I'm looking forward to being able to deliver to the people of this country a world-class transportation system and to be able to unlock the blockage that we have in being able to grow a country. And to all the young people in the South, that these projects are real, these projects are being done with them in mind in order to be able to uplift them and their opportunities in St. Lucia. I thank you.